So yeah, so I'm Chief Digital Officer at Ministry of Housing, Communities, Local Government, and that means I'm responsible for keeping the technology lights on in the department, for making sure that services we run are good quality digital services, mainly B2B things, really to local government, to housing providers rather than to the public per se. Although our energy performance certificates service went live last weekend, which is a big deal for us. But also making sure that we do policy fit for the internet age, really, and the big stewardship that we have over housing and local growth, and obviously the local government too. So what I want to do is start on, we're 3 years old really, nearly 3 years old as a directorate in the department, but not far off 3 years exactly. I was here in Bristol at Local Gov Camp, and I've just been given this new job looking after a bunch of things in the department, including on local government's digital capability, local services side. And I came along, basically said, look, I've got this really interesting job. I've been to Local Gov Camp before, was a fan of Local Gov Camp and other on conferences, and said, ran a session on, what do you want out of this? What is there to be done? And I thought it'd be useful to think about, in the context of what has happened over the last 3 years, perhaps give a bit of a reflection to you as the as part of the sort of foundational community on this stuff. So, Mayan, I think if I can give you a little nod. So let me give you sort of 5 reflections on where I think where we are, where we've been. So the starting one on this is, when we started off with this mission and the team, it was really, I think it was 3 of us at the time. I think it was me, Linda O'Halloran, Eglay, and I think that was about it at the time. And we weren't, obviously we got connections and we'd spoken to people, we were aware of good stuff going on. There's a question of how much appetite for change is there out there? How hard is this going to be? How many of us are there, right? And what I think is really interesting as a first reflection is, frankly, there's enough of us to make really quite a profound change in this system. I think we're still, the things that were important, if you can flick on to the next one, there was some stuff when we started off in the local digital declaration, we're like, let's have this, what's the future of local government services in a digital world? And we were really clear we wanted to co-write this. It wasn't the government's thing, it was us as a community, it was our thing to say, what do we think needs to change? And if I reflect, there's still a lot of this stuff needs to be done. The default from these one level quite motherhood and apple pie set of declaration commitments is still quite a long way from how most of the core software that runs local government works. But when we started off on this journey, we realized that we've got to have this a very different way of doing things with local government. And if we go on to the next slide, Mayan, it's the question of how many people were there with us. And what was really quite amazing is we started off with, I think it was 40-odd co-signatories of this, which was more than I was expecting, perhaps a couple of dozen. But quite quickly, we've had an acceleration of people saying, actually, we want to be part of this. Now, I think what's interesting here is that it's not always, this isn't always in fact, often, in fact, rarely, the leader of the council or the chief executive going, here's a thing, this is what we need to be part of. This was designed as a tool to essentially be there for you to be able to make these changes, for you to be able to have these, to back you in these arguments internally, to say, these are changes that we can make. This is the direction that we're going on. This is what good looks like. And that's pretty good cover. I'm not the more number doesn't mean things are better, because there's a question about the depth of this as well as the breadth of it. But I think my main reflection is there's enough of us to make a difference here. Okay, if we go on to the next. And as I said, this is the thing of, it's designed to have your back. It's not designed as a official government paper that means that we stand up in Parliament and do things. This is a thing, and for you to be able to wave in front of your teams, in front of your managers, in front of your politicians, and say, look, see, we're not alone in this mission. There are others with us on this. This is what good looks like, and this has the bit of what I can provide from central government is essentially this is the backing from the state to say that these changes are the way in which things need to be done. Okay. The second part, and sorry, I just say that I think the thing about having like the declaration has your back. I mean, we can't have your back in that same way. We're not yours, you're not ours. We're just all part of this community. But I think this is very much what our collective endeavour. And the second point about we are a movement here. There's a community of practice. There's a way of looking at the world which is actually incredibly powerful. I think so much of our systems feel like, you know, vertical power structures where the most important person in the room says what happens, then we all kind of go and follow. But the very point of conferences like Local Gov Camp, the reason why they're so powerful is that the horizontal power structures these days can be bigger than the vertical power structures, or at least an important and growing part of that. So what do I mean by this? So if I can go on to the next couple of slides, you know, we've got a role in this. We've got a role to try and prompt and connect this up, and many of you have been, I mean, we're doing sort of face-to-face roadshows at the minute, understandably, but more of this will come along, I'm sure, in times to come. That moment ago, I'm not alone. There are people that I can connect with, people struggling with the same things as I'm struggling. It's incredible. I find these conferences, like I said to Nick earlier, like a shot in the arm. They improve my enthusiasm for the next hard, tough bits that we work through in days and months to come. And similarly, Marion, if you could flick the next one, you know, some of these projects are, we're funded through the Local Digital Fund, and I know we're talking more about that later. But, you know, we've had a lot of convening of people working on the same things. The point around our team is called the Local Digital Collaboration Unit in the department. And that point about getting people to work together, to collaborate, to understand that, yes, they're not just alone, but actually if we're going to build software for the new age, we can reuse, we can borrow, we can share. And it's actually really important that we do these things collectively rather than separately in our own bubbles, because on our own, none of us are big enough to make that change. But I think the important thing, if we can roll on the next, is that when I'm talking about the community, is like the last thing I mean is that the central government has to be the convener, and that it's all about us in the middle connecting up everybody else. We've got a role to play there for sure, but I think that it's most powerful when I see lots of other communities of practice in this space doing their thing. So whether that's with Local Gov Digital itself, and if you're not already on the Slack, you should be. I think it's a really interesting place for people to connect and share and learn from each other. Again, it's yours, it's not ours. It's really important. And there are folks like Soccer-Tim, LGA, and others that have been around for a long time, and also now leading in this new world. But lots of those networks, like iNetwork, Lottie is a new thing in London, and other regional groups are doing their thing. That ability to connect and share, it's about us. It's not about us, if you see what I mean. Okay, so if we can go on. One of the first things we said we used it as our sort of cheesy hashtag all over Twitter in those early days about hashtag fix the plumbing. We must have said this a million times on stages and on the internet in those early days. And it was one of my big reflections is, you know, look, that was right. It was really about fixing the plumbing here. Now, I think how we meant it has changed and evolved over the time. One of my original, when we were talking about this, I think it was Theo from the GLA was sort of kicking around with these ideas in a room in Martian Street in our department before we sort of really started, and this sort of came up. And one of the things I really meant by this at the time was that we don't just mean like, you know, making your website better. We don't just mean like prettifying things. We mean the systems that underpin how we work. We've got to sort the basics out. Let's not go on about AI and blockchains and Alexas and all the rest without doing the hard work to get the basics in a decent place. And I also, having done a job around data, had a really sort of a deep understanding, if you like, or mission to try and get data as an important thing. Now, I think actually our learning on this has changed over the years. So I think, you know, those first rounds of Local Digital Fund, we were asking for application for councils who were up for it, who got an idea, who wanted to do some things. And there was quite a broad spread of ideas. If we come on to the next one. What I think we've learned in part from this is that actually, when we talk about plumbing, it's like actually we've got to take sort of domain by domain by domain, and we've got to actually, you know, there's £3 billion technology market in local government, something like that, depends on how you count it. but you know, there's a lot of money spent, and actually there's not a lot of extra money to go around for extra things. A lot of this now is going to be about actually how do we repurpose the money that's available to do our software in local government, the services and processes in local government better and more efficient. Now, one of the nice things I think that's come out over the last, I was going to say last few months, but you know, it's really not that long ago, was planning white paper, controversial in its own ways. I'm sure there's all sorts of politics around this. But if we crack on to the next bit, one of the important things that you'll see in the planning reforms is a commitment to a much more digital and data-led planning system. Now, this is one of the strong things that you as a community have been telling our team, our department for some time, is that there's some frustration with how the systems work in the planning world. And obviously, as Ministry of Housing, that's something that is also a domain interest through our department. And some of the things that we funded through the Local Digital Fund, I think are going to become and emerge as really, really structurally important things, which are shifting how we think about how the planning system works. And I think it's really exciting. So there's the back office planning system. I think the next slide is the reducing valid planning applications. If you haven't seen these things, go and have a look. There's some really interesting work underway there, and I think that these are the sort of the things that, depending on what happens in the future with money and all, of course, politics and all those other things, we're starting to get to how do we start to scale some of these things. My colleagues in our team that deal with the digital planning side, I think it got this sort of merging view, coming back to the plumbing, about what's the role of central government to be able to think about a software market that is modular, that's interoperable, but where data and the technical standards are the important things. And instead of just designing those from high without any knowledge of the software, the importance of being there shoulder to shoulder with you as you're implementing new systems to understand what are the critical things that in the end will be the standards that enforce this movement. We're not in the business of, I think, in the department of making fancy services for the planning world. I think we're much more about ensuring the plumbing enables a system to function. Loads more I could talk about that, but I'll try not to. And things like having just simple lists and indexes of things. Like, if you ever try to find the local plan, either in your own area or a neighboring area, we had what, 20% or so with like unpersistent URLs just moving around just over a couple of months when we were doing some of this work. And there's an awful lot of improvement, a lot of value to be added quite quickly, I think. Okay, so that was that one. And I don't need to tell you this, but a lot have changed, hasn't it, in the last 6 months, and you'll only have your own story of that. And I know a lot's been shared on this already. I think if we crack on the next slide, Mayan, I think there's loads of things that we could put. It's always risky for me doing these sort of jobs to kind of pick one out and say, look, here's a nice example. This one's from Camden, but you all working in local government, particularly in digital teams as suppliers, rolled up your sleeves when this stuff hit over Easter and just before, wasn't it? We were super busy as a team doing things like the shielding service, making sure you got the data in a sensible way, and software that we really sometimes were writing over a weekend ready to ship for the next day. It really, I think, has changed the dynamic, certainly centrally, and I hope for you too, about people understanding that yes, you can work online, yes, the tech does work, yes, you can use videos and collaboration in meetings for meetings and for core work, but also look how important these services that we do, look how important it is to be able to ship product quickly and effectively. And I think in many ways we wouldn't, of course, wish any of this horrible situation in the world at all, but it has had this impact for many of us on the way in which we work, the culture, and our position within our own organisations. And I know you're already doing this, but please do seize that moment, because obviously those at the background to this ebbs and flows. And then towards the end, I think I was trying to reflect on what do I think after 3 years? What's the big story? Where are we? Now, I talked at the start of this around the importance of this change across our sector as a movement, as almost like a campaign of people working together, making those changes to software, to hardware, but also to the culture in their own organizations. And that collaboration, that connection that we have is something that we've really fostered collectively, before we were on the scene, but also since that. But it really feels like now it's that point of going, okay, how do we scale? How do we really ship this software, reuse people's whole software components? How do we help those different suppliers in this market to thrive and develop and get to this next stage? Now, if we can do the next slide. So an awful lot, of course, for where I sit depends on spending review and all those sorts of things, which are what do they say, like above my pay grade, right? So we're sort of battle away in the way we normally do, and we remain hopeful that we'll get to a different level in the near future to be able to give support in here. But I think, like I said it earlier on about the community, is like there's some things that we will fund, and we'll be keen to kind of prompt software into that more modular, more user-centered, more data-first way of working. But it's not about us in the centre. It's not about MHCLG. It's about councils. It's about you shipping services working in a different way. And there's just hundreds of examples I can give here. And again, always slightly nervous of giving ones on the screen in this way, because it's like picking people out as favourites. But we should celebrate some of this stuff. So I think, well, with Cambridgeshire and others working on the blue badge systems and the sort of things they do, not without support, because it's the right thing to do, because it's a better way of delivering software, because it's better for users, because it's better for council officers. I think this thing about shipping software, relearning, stuff we do every day, but actually scaling that in a different sort of way feels to me like the really big challenge for the next few years. And I hope we can play a really good and strong part of that. And if I remember rightly, that might be my last slide. No, it wasn't. That's it. This is the reveal. So don't tell Nick. But also we're hiring. And interestingly, we're hiring in Birmingham. Now, of course, we're all sort of sitting at home or in and out of the office sparingly these days. But it's important for us that we do have this footprint around the country. We're out and about, perhaps more than most civil servants anyway. And I've appreciated going and seeing you and your teams, your bosses, and helping sort of just get that, making sure that this is seen as a very normal and mainstream endeavour that we're involved in. But please do have a look. We're going to there'll be a blog going up, if it's not already up, on our mhclgdigital.blog.gov.uk site. Or in fact, Moddy's put it in the chat. But if you're interested, please do apply and say hi. I think that is it. Fingers crossed. There we go. Thanks very much, everyone.
Over kind of Q&A, I was wondering whether does anyone have any questions for Paul? Please use the chat functionality, or also happy for you to kind of unmute yourself and ask the question. No? Okay, well, there's still time at the end as well if anything comes to mind. So we're going to move on. So thank you, Paul. And as kind of Paul mentioned, it's 2 years since we launched the declaration in July 2018. And we asked a whole lot of people to share their stories about the declaration and how it actually helped them. And there was a great outpouring of fantastic examples from all over the country. For example, the declaration helped inform strategies in Staffordshire County Council, helped develop reusable code for council websites in Croydon, Brighton and Hove and Westminster, and hopefully more councils to come. And also, as Paul mentioned, spurred and inspired new collaborative groups like Lottie, and also helped Cambridge Council make better digital services during COVID. I want to share a short soundbite from Paul Fleming, Director of Digital Business Change at Blackburn and Darwen Borough Council. He talks about how the declaration helped him and the new unitary.
So my name's Paul Fleming. I'm the Director of Digital and Business Change in Blackburn with Darwen Council, which is a unitary authority in the northwest of England.
And you signed the Local Digital Declaration in February 2019. How has it helped you?
It's helped us in many ways, I think. So first of all, it was a real visible commitment for us signing the declaration. It was something that was really exciting for me. I've always been around collaboration, around learning, and I think it provided this brilliant framework for us. But first and foremost, it was a visible commitment for us. We got our exec member, our elected member, stood up in front of the press with me talking about that locally, and it was a sign to the public. It was a real sign to our organisation of a path of travel for us. And it really gave us a framework from there on in that I've been able to work with my teams and wider teams on to I suppose beyond that create a bit of a culture with the organisation. And I think, you know, a lot of that would have been achievable without a sort of national and local collaboration like the declaration, but it definitely helped me. It definitely legitimised a lot of the thinking that we were doing. And I suppose since then, what it's opened up, you know, some of the learning and some of the collaboration has definitely been able to enabled us to go further than what we could have done, I think, without it.
So with COVID, we saw a lot of local authorities responding with speed, creativity, working across organization boundaries, and used your local knowledge to deliver vital services to your communities. There were so many great examples. Paul touched on a few already, but other ones, including Ada and Wording, created a volunteer and community response platform in 48 hours and allowed volunteers to kind of pick up tasks in the community and then give the council information back on how that task went. And it's not just digital systems. Local authorities created easy to understand checklists to make sure the community had the information that they needed, and also offered payment holidays like Camden Council to boot. During the initial crisis response, our team continued with our convening role, but actually focused in on COVID activities. We crowdsourced a public document with useful digital tools and approaches, and also started to carry out research to show how councils were responding and what were the barriers, which resulted in us publishing our findings and a checklist of tips for communicating COVID information to residents. We also ran weekly calls to share information about the shielding service, and also had councils share their approaches to common challenges. And we had a great number of participants, over 350 plus. As the country shifted from crisis response to recovery, we ran workshops to understand recovery issues with three major themes emerging: data and reporting, community and engagement, and developing new working practices. So we used these three themes to launch a special COVID round of the Local Digital Fund, and were blown away by the response. We had 125 participants from 94 councils, and we funded 11 projects. Some of our projects will be showcasing what they've done in the lightning talks shortly following. As part of the New Ways of Working theme, we launched an online bootcamp to help people thrive for working remotely. We had just over 1,000 people registered, and if you haven't done so already, we would love to hear back from you on how you found the course. We have more online training to come, so watch out for announcement in our newsletter and also on our Twitter handle.